Game of Thrones made quite a few changes to the ages of characters in adapting things from page to screen with the original Song of Ice and Fire. Pretty much all of our main child characters are aged up, as this makes sense given the fact that Martin originally intended for there to be a 5-year gap in the story, but that was later scrapped, so all of these characters are stuck at very young ages. And that includes the one and only King Tommen Baratheon, first of his name, current Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, except he's not really the Protector of the Realm because at 10, he cannot rule the realm. We've had a lot of kings come into power young in Westerosi history. Aegon III, Jaehaerys was a little bit older, but he was still quite young. But in all of these instances, Tommen included, a regent is required. Someone to rule the realm instead of that young individual while they learn and come into maturity. As we learned from early on in the War of the Five Kings, that rule by a child is not always a great idea. With that said, entering the Winds of Winter, we come into a King's Landing without a regent, a ship without a rudder, given the fact that the last thing we see on page in A Song of Ice and Fire, as of 2011, as of 2025, is the death of the previous regent. Kevin Lannister had been ruling in Tommen's stead. Cersei Lannister was the main regent for all of A Feast for Crows. She was effectively in power, and that book is about her downward spiral falling out of power, but with her imprisoned by the Faith, Kevin took over and decided to kind of set things to right, which he was doing quite well, according to certain individuals, such as Varys, who I trust as someone to assess whether or not a ruler is doing well in the first place. But, as mentioned, that epilogue chapter of A Dance with Dragons features Kevin as a viewpoint character, and if you know anything about epilogues in Ice and Fire, you will know that that means he is doomed. He and Pycelle are killed, leaving this position of Tommen's regent vacant going into the next book in the series. And today I want to discuss some of the candidates I think could fill that role, in addition to one most likely path that I see forward. Typically in Westeros, a regent has some close relation to the individual for which they are ruling the realm. And I should also say, it is not always just because of age. We see in House of the Dragon and in Fire and Blood that Aemond Targaryen takes over as regent for Aegon after his injuries at the Battle of Rook's Rest. There's an episode of House of the Dragon named for it. I would argue it's one of the worst episodes of House of the Dragon, but that's neither here nor there. But we see that again in the main series with this blood relation, seeing as Tommen's regents are Cersei, his mother, and Kevin, his great uncle. And then again in Fire and Blood, we have Alyssa Valerion serving as regent for her son, King Jaehaerys, who would come to be known as the Old King, but at this point he was very, very young. So, in terms of looking for regents, we should probably start there with blood relations to Tommen, and there are vanishingly few. Well, I shouldn't say that. He is effectively out of Baratheon blood that he could potentially sub in, unless he wants to name his uncle Stannis as regent, which I, for some reason, don't think would go great. And then the Lannister side, well, there are a lot of Lannisters, especially the Lannisport Lannisters. The relevant ones, and the ones that are more closely related to Tommen, are in short supply at this point. Cersei and Jaime very much have their own things going on. Cersei is definitely not going in as regent again, given that she is still having to go on trial against the Faith, and Jaime is captured by Stoneheart in the Riverlands. Kevin is dead, and there are some thoughts in the fandom that Jenna Lannister could be recalled to serve as regent, but I tend to doubt that interpretation because the Faith has kind of built this movement on elements of the systems in Westeros existing as they are, and part of that falls in line with kind of the patriarchal line of succession. I don't super think they would recall a female Lannister to rule as regent when there is a much more available Lannister who is probably more pliant right on hand, that being Lancel. Lancel is not my overall pick for Regent, but I could very much see a world in which Lancel is tapped to serve in this role, likely by the High Sparrow. The Faith is a very legitimate political movement in Westeros at this point in the story, and they seem to just be growing and growing until they'll eventually likely reunite with Aegon and kind of lift him up as this righteous and holy king in their eyes. But for the moment, they do have someone on hand who could serve as a kind of Lannister Regent. Well, yes, Lancel has joined the Warrior's Sons, which is this Order of the Faith militant that requires swearing off all of your inheritance. The Faith militant and the Faith generally have made plenty of exceptions in the past, and the way they got into power was the High Sparrow giving an exception, allowing Cersei's debt to be forgiven in exchange for rearmament. So I think it is in his nature to make this political move to kind of better the Faith, at least in the short term here, and allow Lancel to step into the role of king. And it also could be fun to examine, like, Lancel, who killed Robert, is now acting as regent for Robert's quote unquote son. It is worth noting that there are historical precedents for other types of regencies. When Aegon III was in his minority, there was a council of 7 regents, which could very much appeal to the Faith given their obsession with the number 7. But regardless, that is kind of frowned upon given the fact that Aegon III's minority in regency was a complete disaster, to the point that his brother Viserys allowed his son Daeron to step into rule at age 14 to avoid the same thing. I do think it is a possibility that there is some council assembled balance between nobles and member of the Faith to act as kind of a guard and a regent to Tommen, rather than vesting all of that power in one individual. That could end up being more of a compromise between the Faith and the Tyrells, as we do see that these two powers are kind of at odds in the epilogue of A Dance with Dragons, and now the Lannisters don't really have a force behind them without Kevin, unless Cersei is able to seize control, which it's unclear if she'll be able to do in her currently greatly diminished position. I do think there is one other key person who I think is most likely to be regent, and I think that this person being regent kind of upends a bunch of theories and assumed truths that the fan has been thinking for a very long time. But before we get into that, let me know who you want to be regent in the comments below, or who you think would make the best regent. And while you're down there, leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and I just really appreciate it. I think the clear pick for the Regent is the current Hand of the King, as these titles can often go hand in hand, no pun intended, that being the one, the only, Mace the Ace Tyrell. Mace is someone who's always been kind of grasping for further political power. I promise that wasn't another hand pun, but regardless, he is someone who very much wants more for himself and his house, and he is in a position to claim it. We see the Faith, the Tyrells, and the Lannisters all in kind of a standoff going into the dance epilogue, and now the Lannisters have been greatly weakened. The Tyrells hold a lot of power at court, and by claiming the regency as well, they could very much shore up their position as the main force behind the crown in King's Landing. And what's more, it is worth noting that Mace Tyrell is someone who is related to Tommen, technically. Tommen is married to Margaery, so he is Tommen's father-in-law. An argument could be made by the Tyrells that he is the closest thing to kin that Tommen now has in the capital, who isn't either being tried by the Faith or has forsworn everything for the Faith. So this could be an interesting way to go about it. This flips the script on a lot of things that fans, including myself, have kind of assumed about the trajectory of the story going forward. Mace Tyrell's narrative is very tied up with Storm's End, this castle that he keeps besieging but can never actually claim. And I, along with many other people, have asserted that he and his army, after Margaery's trial, are going to march south and reclaim it from Aegon. I don't necessarily think that is the most likely outcome. I think the army will march south. That is very much lampshaded in the A Dance with Dragons epilogue. It is said that Mace Tyrell's army is marching south as soon as Margaery's trial ends up being a win for Margaery. And we hear in the Mercy sample chapter that it is in fact won by Margaery. Her innocence is proven, and it seems like the troops will now be freed to march south. But I don't think Mace is going to be leading them if he is Hand of the King and Regent of the Realm. Specifically, I think that Mace Tyrell is very much set up to be trounced entirely. I think he's being set up to lose everything in a spectacular fashion, finally having his reputation as a kind of okay military commander via winning that one battle supposedly against Robert during Robert's Rebellion, being completely upturned given the fact that he is kind of a complete fraud. And I think that will come not in this first battle. We hear in Arion's second sample chapter for the Winds of Winter that the Golden Company has already claimed Storm's End. They've already done what Mace Tyrell has set out to do, and it seems like their next stop after that is going to be making progress towards King's Landing to claim the castle for, or not the castle, the city and the realm for Aegon's self. And if we examine exactly what's going on with the Battle of Steel, as it's been called by the fans, this battle that is going to happen with the Golden Company, either trying to get Storm's End or defending Storm's End from any invaders, Mace's forces aren't really mentioned. We hear that Red Ronnet Connington Connington and his forces are running south to justify and kind of get vengeance for the murders committed by John Connington and him taking Griffin's Roost again. But we don't hear that Mace Tyrell's forces are moving anywhere. And I don't think they're going to be the tip of the spear here. I think Reach forces are very much going to come into play, but I think they're going to come into play by flipping to Aegon's side. Specifically, the other individual who is a key player in not only politics in King's Landing, but the movements of this southern army is the one and only Randall Tarley. I almost said son, father of Samwell Tarley, and he is a much more accomplished military mind than Mace himself. I think that Mace is going to sit back. He's going to remain in the capital. He has to rule. He has to be regent. Oh, go off, do your battle, Randall. Win it for me as you won the Battle of Ashford for me. And I think that Randall Tarley is someone who might kind of be sick of Mace Tyrell's shit. We hear in John Connington's first chapter that the Golden Company has friends in the Reach. This idea that people in that region of Westeros might be sympathetic to the cause of this invading king. And I think one person who is primed to be sympathetic to get out of the under the thumb of this lord who's been over him for so long, taking credit for his victories, is going to be Randall Tarley. I think the Tyrell army is going to be given to Randall Tarley, and Randall Tarley is going to flip. He's going to end up turning on Mace and marching alongside Aegon to claim the capital for this new ruler. Two additional points to mention vis-a-vis Randall Tarley's loyalty. First and foremost, in that aforementioned epilogue chapter of A Dance with Dragons, he goes on and on about whether or not Aegon is legitimate. He could be a feigned boy. This John Connington probably isn't John Connington. To the point where it seems very suspicious and almost like someone who is bad at lying and trying to deflect suspicion from this invasion that he is kind of sympathetic towards. And beyond that, there is also the matter of his son Dickon's marriage. Dickon is a lot younger in the books as compared to the show, speaking of aging characters up, but he was recently married to the heir of House Mooten, this house in the Riverlands that is very kind of storedly connected to House Targaryen, not just to the Dance of the Dragons, where they have an important role that I will not spoil, but beyond that, they go back to having an attempt on the good Queen Alysanne's life in their pools. There's a lot of history there. And additionally, they fought on behalf of Aerys II against their liege lord's House Tully in the recent past at Robert's Rebellion. So that could be setting up the fact that Randall is maybe seeking a change in a lot of regards. And the Mootons are known as very rich, a very wealthy family, even more wealthy than the Tullys, their liege lords. So this could be a good status move for Randall overall as well. There is one other little detail that I could mention, and I'm not mentioning this as foundational evidence. I'm mentioning this as something that could be mirroring things in an interesting way. Specifically on HBO, we see Randall Tarley fighting for Cersei, who effectively ends up being the stand-in for Aegon in the final leg of the story with her opposition to Daenerys overall. And then we see Dickon, his son, and Randall being barbecued by Daenerys and her dragons, which ultimately kind of poisons Sam against her a little bit, and that is part of what results in him telling Jon his name. Well, I don't think all of that is obviously going to go down in the exact same way in the books. I do think it could be interesting if this is a way to kind of turn Sam against Dany, though Sam doesn't really like Randall. He does really like his brother because he's just kind of a sweet kid. And beyond that, it could be interesting to have this force between Jon and Dany, who is so close to Jon, that being Sam, especially if Sam has some knowledge of Jon's identity. I think it is then that we will get this big moment of Mace Tyrell in battle. This is when we'll get our, I'm going to mispronounce it again, Augencourt moment. And at that point, I think that will be Mace Tyrell's doom. I think the main thing that people misunderstand about this part of the story is the order of operations that things are going to go down in, because we do already hear that Storm's End has been taken by the Golden Company. While there is some questionability as to whether or not that happens, we do hear in The Griffin Reborn that they intend to take this castle by guile, not by battle. I think any battles that are going to happen are going to be between Storm's End and King's Landing, either defending Storm's End from invaders from the north or marching forward and trying to make their way to the capital. I think a big part of that is not necessarily going to be battles. I think that Aegon's invasion so far has been so characterized by luck and good circumstance and everything going right for Aegon. It's insane. And I think that at this point, it is going to continue and continue and continue by way of all of these Reacher lords joining his cause, because they are the Knights of Summer, and Aegon is promising a better tomorrow. He's like morning again in America. And similar to the person who coined that slogan, I do think that Aegon is still something of a con man, and I do think things aren't going to go well in the long run. But I do think whoever is going to be Tommen's regent is very likely doomed from 50 different angles. So I am very sorry to Mace the Ace. I'm very sorry to potentially Lancel or Jenna Lannister, but overall, this position is not going to be great because there's going to be a lot of bad stuff happening in King's Landing in the Winds of Winter. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. It's free and it really helps the channel. Also leave a comment, let me know what you think of the theory, and I'll have many more videos for you in the near future on A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, House of the Dragon, A Song of Ice and Fire, and Game of Thrones. So I hope you'll stick around for all of those. I also have a Patreon, which is linked in the description if you want early ad-free videos and access to a Discord server. But yeah, thank you again for watching. I will see you all in the very near future. Goodbye, everyone.